Greetings from Mesa United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m. and at 11 a.m. we gather for contemporary worship. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
The epistle reading comes to us today from the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, beginning with verse 1. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled. For God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. And our gospel reading today is found in the book of Luke, beginning with chapter 14. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of the leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, give this person your place. And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowliest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is the reading for us today, the children of God, and so we say.
Normally in June, I preach a state of the church address to celebrate what we have done in the past year, to talk about where we still have room to grow, and to set out a vision where we might be going in coming years. I was set to give that message in June, and instead I preached on the shooting in Orlando. And so today I'm going to deliver that message, even though we mourn yet another senseless killing, this one literally in our backyards. But I'm now in my 4th year here at Mesa View, and we've seen some high highs and some low lows in those 3+ years. And I'm beginning to hear two sort of strains from you in making comments about my ministry. The first is because the last 2 pastors who served here only served for 4 years. You think that I'm going to be moved by the bishop very soon. It's always a possibility. I serve on a 1-year appointment reappointment. Every year I'm up for reappointment, but I don't think that's a very strong possibility, at least not at the current moment. The other thing to remember is before those two pastors, the last two pastors before them, both served for 10 years. So you have a history of long tenured pastors in this congregation. The other thing I'm hearing a lot of recently is other people who are saying they want me to be here for 20 years, which is then shortly followed by people saying, so that way you can do my funeral. There are some problems with that. The first is basically what you're saying to me. I want you to be here as long as I'm here, and make sure to turn out the lights when you leave. But the bigger problem is that 20 years only takes me to 63, and I don't want to have to move to a new congregation for 2 years before I'm able for retirement. So I want you to start saying, I want you to be here for 22 years, so I can at least retire from this congregation. But if you want me to stay, to be your minister for a year or longer, there is some work that we have to do. Because the truth is, the bishop is not going to move pastors who are serving churches that are doing well. And so if we are financially stable and viable, if we are growing spiritually, if we are growing missionally, if we are growing numerically, the bishop is not going to be inclined to take me to someplace else. So keep that in mind as we talk about where we've been and where we are going. Now, if you were here 3 years ago when I started, you know that we were not in a very good financial position. That was the reason I was appointed to come here. My strongest memory of that time is Kim Short, who was the preschool director at that time, coming into the office and asking if she could buy a roll of stamps, and the office administrator calling Roger Sargent, who was our treasurer at the time, to make sure we had enough money in the bank to buy a roll of stamps. In addition, we were behind on lots of our bills, including being $15,000 in debt to the conference. I can gladly say we are no longer in that position. It used to be that Don Coates, who's now the chair of the Finance Committee, and I would sit down several times a month to talk about what was our expected income, what were the expenses we knew that we were going to have, and how we were going to make those things equal out at the end of the month. We had conversations about, we have a payroll coming up. How are we going to make sure we have enough money in the bank to be able to make our payroll this time? For most of 2016, Don and I did not have those conversations. I was seeing a lot less of Don, which is both good and bad. But June and July, our finances got really tight, as they often do. People are going away on vacation, and so we're not receiving the income for your tithes and offerings, which is one reason to do electronic giving. It fluctuates, takes the fluctuation out for the church of what we can rely on every week. We also lose the preschool income. And so June and July tend to be very tight months. This past June was in particularly very, very tight, much tighter than in past years. We wiped out our emergency fund, which was up to $5,000 coming out of July. We had $34 left in our emergency fund. But that did allow us to get through the summer months. We did have a major plumbing repair of $2,300 that we had to do that we don't expect those sorts of expenses to be there. We made it through okay. We've now caught back up on all the bills that we got behind on throughout the summer. But the biggest piece of this is we didn't get into our financial situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. It's going to take us a little while. The biggest piece of that is still our mortgage payment, which behind my compensation package is the largest expense in our budget. It's basically another clergy member salary in package we're paying on the mortgage, and we're certainly not getting benefits of another clergy person or another staff member out in return. The property does give us lots of opportunities, and we'll talk about that, but that's really the biggest piece that hurts us financially. But the good news is, come the end of the year, we should be under $800,000 owed on the mortgage. That's correct, right, Don?
Right.
Okay. But that's still a lot of money for a church that worships a little over 100 people. The other, as I said, the good news is we are caught up on where we got behind in the summer. We're even ahead on some of our payments on some issues. And our emergency fund is now back up to more than $6,000. And our goal is to be closer to $15,000 by the time summer comes around next year in order to help us cover through those lean months that we get into. One cautionary note is that the YMCA, who rents the annex building, which is the one in the back corner of the property here, were unable to make their preschool financially viable, and so they have closed that. They have said that they're going to try some other programs in that building, but if that is not financially successful for them, that they will be leaving at the end of their lease in December. Now that gives us some opportunities to be able to use that building for other uses for the church or maybe some other outside groups. But it could provide us with a financial impact of losing that income. Not everything they paid was going into our general budget, so it will not be as big of an impact as it might have been if we had not thought ahead to make sure that they were not totally supporting our general budget. But looking at possibilities for that building, it's possible that what we might be able to do there would eliminate any financial impact we may feel, that we can generate other income through that building that will cover for what the Y had been paying for us. I'm also pleased to announce that for the second consecutive year, we did have our books financially audited, which had not been done in a long, long time. The auditors were very happy with what they found. There were no major issues. They did make a couple of recommendations to us, and they were also grateful to see that we are putting into place financial policies and plans, and we are actually following the policies that we have on the books. The report of our audit can be found on our website. Actually, the past 2 years can be found on our website, and you can also obtain a copy in the office. So there's some bad news and good news about finances. But as I said on my first Sunday here, it's not about the money. Ultimately, it's never really about the money. Because when we are doing God's work, when we are fulfilling the mission that we are called to, when we are doing the things that God asks us to do, God will provide. Now, one of the ways that God provides is through you. So it doesn't mean you just get to sit back and not open up your wallets and let God do it. God asks all of us to give, but God provides when we are doing God's work. I think that's what we've seen over these past 3 years. And I was reminded of that really recently when Irene Bishop showed me. I'd written a letter to Santa just before Christmas in 2014 in the newsletter, outlining some of the capital expenditures that we were looking at doing that we didn't have money in the budget to do. These are things that we would like to have accomplished, but we don't have the money. So Santa, if you could help us to deliver these gifts for us, that would be great. And so Irene brought this letter to me, which I had really forgotten about. She said, where are you? Where are we? What have we done on this list? And I was really proud to see that except for the items of the largest costing one, like somebody paying off our mortgage, we had accomplished most of those tasks, or we had decided that the return on investment was not worthwhile of doing those projects, or they were things that were in the pipeline to be done very soon. It was a good reminder for me, and I think it's a good reminder for all of us, that sometimes we take the things that we've done for granted because they just become standard. They become things we're used to seeing all the time now, and we don't celebrate those accomplishments. So some of the other capital improvements we've done in the past year, including installing a new fence around the playground, doing some other improvements to the playground. We finished painting all of the classrooms and all the rooms in both buildings here in the administration building over the past 3 years. This room is the only one left to be done, and we have a bid to have that accomplished, not in the budget. So if somebody would like to talk with me about what that looks like, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. We've installed new panels in the sign on Taylor Ranch Road. We've installed announcement screens now in both buildings. We've installed new worship software. We've installed new signs, worship screens in here, even though one of them is not working this morning, and I apologize for that, and I appreciate your patience as we're learning into this process. Sometimes we take 2 steps back in order to get 1 step forward. But when we were installing these screens, I was playing the good supervisory role down here on the floor while the guys were up on multiple ladders trying to hang them up. And one of our preschoolers came up to me and she said, "Now it feels like church in here." That's what she's used to in church. And so some of you might think, well, why do we need to do this? That's what younger generations expect to be there, and it allows us greater flexibility and more opportunities about things we can do. We could not have done that sermon series on the movies of Pixar without having the new worship software in place or the new screens. We've also installed new flooring in some places in the administration building, and we'll be rekeying both these buildings, starting here first with the worship center, installing security cameras as part of the overall plan that the trustees are working on for security and emergency preparedness for these buildings. So, for example, what if someone was to have a heart attack during worship? What would we do? If the fire alarms go off during worship, what do we do? Who's in charge? Who makes announcements about what's going on? Those are some of the things the trustees are working on so that we are prepared. We hope it never happens, but we need to be prepared about what we're doing. One of the reasons we're talking with APD and working with city leaders is how do we as a church are ready for if there's a major emergency here in our community, how would we respond to that as a community of faith? And it's not just our capital improvements that are increasing and going strong, it's also our programs. So last year, Leanna and Jordan decided they were going to restart our youth program. We started with 4 youth last fall, and by the end of the year, we were up to 9 youth who were participating in our youth program. If you're not good at math, that's more than 100% growth in 1 year. The work that Al and his volunteers have been doing in the food pantry has greatly expanded the ministry that we are able to serve through them. They're now collecting food that would otherwise, milk that would otherwise be thrown away by APS, and not only using it through our food pantries, but also giving that out to other food pantries in the city, and also to several homeless ministries. We've collected enough money to be able to provide 3 more schools in Kenya with clean water systems. We collected lots of coats for the homeless as well as for our local schools, backpacks for the schools. Our prayer shawl ministry provides knitted hats and booties to newborns at the area hospitals, as well as our prayer shawls that we give to people who are in need to let them know that God loves them, and we want you to know that we are in prayer for you. And we collected more than 250 teddy bears for the fire department to give to children that they encounter when they're out on calls. And that doesn't count lots of other things that we do collectively and lots of things that you are doing individually to make a difference in our community. But we still have a ways to go, not only in meeting our community needs, but also to be living into our mission statement. And our mission statement, which was approved by Leadership Council this spring, says that we are to know and love God and our neighbor through relationship, service, and witness. Now, when we were working on this, I said it was the knowing and relationship part that are going to make or break this, whether we live into this mission or not. Because it's not just about knowing God and being in relationship with God. It entails more than just showing up here on Sunday mornings. It also involves being involved in faith development activities and small groups and missional activities. But it's also about knowing and being in relationship with our neighbors. And that's much harder to do. Because we're good at being in service to people, but we're not so good about being in service with people. That we can go out and we can give food through our food pantry, which is amazing work. We're doing astounding things for a church of our size. But until we learn to be in relationship with those people, not those people, don't mean that term, in relationship with those that we are helping and assisting, then we're not truly knowing them. We're not truly in a relationship and seeing them as our neighbor. Now, there are some things that we're going to do that we just can't build relationships. So the Covenant group now has the snack bag ministry as you're leaving the sanctuary to give to the people you see who are in need. Encountering them on the corner, you're not going to be able to really be in relationship with them. We can't be in relationship with the people that the fire department gives teddy bears to. But we can certainly be in relationship with the fire department. And we can be in relationship with the other social service agencies in Albuquerque who are working on those issues. And we can be in relationship with our neighbors and others that we are serving directly to get to know them and to know who they are and how they can help us too. How we can be in relationship and service with each other, not just to each other. Which then builds into the bigger picture of what we do as a church. Those who study church growth say that one of the major things that they look at, whether a church is growing or whether it's stable or in decline, is where they are focused. If churches are focused on themselves, they're focused on what they do for themselves, and they're focused on their buildings, those churches are in decline. Versus churches that are focused outward, focused on being in relationship with their communities and serving and being in missional activities, those are the churches that tend to be growing. And I think there's lots of reasons why that's the case, but some of them are because of those passages we just heard this morning from Luke and from Hebrews. That we, those who are meeting strangers and welcoming them, might be meeting angels who are in disguise. Certainly, we are doing what God has called us to do, and we are told that that's pleasing in God's sight. Now, we shouldn't do things in order to please God. We do things because they're the right things to do, and it just happens that they please God as well. That when we only focus on ourselves, then we're like that person who goes in and takes the seat of honor at the dinner table, rather than sitting in the seat of lowest place, the seat often represented by the servant in the ancient world at the dining situation, a place which we can be elevated then not by our own selves, not by the work we do, but by the host, God, who calls us to that party, to that table. It is still my hope and desire that everyone in the congregation will give a minimum of 1 hour in service to the church and the community. We still need to be building towards that as our goal. But what we find again and again, we heard this in a passage from Hebrews as well, that when we are faithful, God is always faithful in return. And if people want to be a part of places that are not focused on themselves, that are not just a big social club, but places where people are being changed and transformed, and more importantly, places that are transforming the communities in which they live. And I think we're headed in that direction. I'm proud to say that the number of people that we served, that we report to the annual conference, was more than doubled in last year's report from where we had been serving just 2 years ago. And our worship attendance is also up 10%. It was actually up nearly 20% as we came into the summer, which we normally drop off. I'm hoping that as we move into the fall, our worship numbers will again back up to the numbers where we were in spring, and at the end of the year we'll have nearly 20% growth in worship attendance. Our prayer partners team, which is a group of people, there's currently 30 of them, who pray for the church every single day, for the church, for its leaders and issues that we are facing, have been praying for about 1.5 years to have sustained worship attendance of 60 in both worship services. And we've gotten over 60 in both worship services different times, and I'm happy to say that we're not, while this service has the largest growth, our contemporary worship service is also seeing growth. That Prayer Partners ministry has also been praying very hard for lots of other issues that have been affecting us over the past few years, and we have seen, or I have seen, dramatic results. And so I thank all those who are part of that prayer ministry, and if you'd like to participate in that, please speak with me. Our numbers are moving in the right direction across the board. Spiritual growth, missional activities, and also numerical growth, and we should celebrate that. But we still have lots of things left to be done. We need to put together a team who will oversee our faith development work that comes out of the Healthy Church Initiative, to take over from that team, to make it a permanent team here at the church, to oversee all activities, including our small groups. And we have to be thinking of and starting new ways to think of how we reach out to our neighbors, to be in relationship with them. Now, one of the good things I can say about this congregation is that you're more open to change than most congregations are. At least if you're complaining, it's not getting back to me. And sometimes that might be just as good. But 2 major changes. We changed how we have the seating arranged here in the worship center this past year. We put up the new screens on the wall, and very few people complained about those. Lots of churches, that would cause, we think we would crucify Christ himself if you changed how people sit. And I still have people, you're moving around and sitting in different places. It throws me off on Sundays, but I'm grateful that you're doing it. So those might seem minor changes to you, but But again, some places those would be major, which means that I know that you're willing to go to new places and do new things other than the way we've always done it in the past. Now, another thing that separates growing churches from those who are in decline is churches who are able to say who they are. That is, if we say, well, there's not really any big difference between us and Cross of Hope, the church on the other side of the fire station. We're basically the same, just two different congregations. Churches who say that decline. Churches who can tell their story and say how we're different than the other churches around us, how we are making a difference, how lives are being transformed here in a congregation, and how we are transforming lives in a community. Those are the churches that grow. We're not really good about telling our story. And so we need to get better about that. We need to start telling our stories in committee and team meetings and in Sunday school and in small groups and here in worship to talk about how we have been changed. And when you go out and you're working on the Habitat House, to talk about how you met that family and what a difference home ownership will mean for this family and how we are participating in that. Because one of the questions that will often be asked of churches is, if you closed, would anyone notice? Would anyone care? Now, I hope that if we were to close our doors, people would notice, and that people would care that we were not here anymore. But we still have a ways to go. And we have this back piece of the property which is not being utilized currently, that we're still paying for. It's part of the mortgage. And I've heard lots of ideas about what could be done there, and lots of sort of competing ideas, because we often get stuck into this, well, it has to be either we do this or we do this, rather than thinking of both and situations. Because we can do a lot of both ands in the property that we have. And one of the ideas I'm most intrigued about is there is a growing and increasing need for adult daycare facilities. That is, seniors who are not living in assisted living communities or living at home with a caretaker, but they need someplace to go during the day, and they can't stay at home by themselves. And there's an increasing need for that. The facilities here in Albuquerque, especially on the west side, are currently maxed out. There's long waiting lists, and so far there's no churches stepping into that gap. But what about if we stepped into that gap? Because there's also a lot of work that's going on in making combined preschool facilities and also senior facilities, and the huge benefits for both of those groups of what the preschoolers learn from the seniors and what seniors can do with preschoolers. And we have a very successful Christian preschool. You should be very proud of what we do here. We need to increase those ties and those bonds of how we work together in that ministry. But what about if we began thinking about how that property might be able to fulfill a greater need that we know is right here in our community that's not yet being met? It would transform some people's lives. That leads then to the other corner, which is this front corner here with the pond. And I know that lots of people have different ideas, and I know some of you have very deeply held opinions about what should happen on that piece of the property, because I hear them all the time. But what I have said to the trustees who are responsible for the property, and I take full responsibility for this, is we shouldn't be doing anything, we shouldn't be spending any more money on that until we know what the purpose of it is and how we're going to continue to pay to maintain it. Because until we do that, then we're not being good stewards of our resources. We're not being good stewards of the resources you have entrusted to us, and we're just throwing more and more money into it. And so we need to come up with a master plan for that corner of what it should be and how we use it and how it can serve the community. And I know that there are people who love having the pond there. My wife is one of them. It's one of the constant arguments we hear about the church is, what am I doing about the pond? And I tell her exactly what I just said to you. She doesn't like that answer, and so we keep having this argument, but that's where we are. But that's not a natural pond. It holds water because we have a liner there. We have to have a place for the water that runs off of the property to go. And it goes there. It's been going there for a long time. It doesn't mean it has to go there. That we could structure the property so that we could take the water in different directions. One of the ideas that we've talked about is a community garden. What about if we took that water and we put fruit trees out there and made a bigger floodplain, and that the water that fed those fruit trees was from our parking lot and the rest of the property? That we could still have a water feature out there that would bring people in, but we could take that natural, with a dip that we've carved into the land there, and turn it basically into an amphitheater. You put a stage in there and regrade it a little bit so that people could sit up on the side. We could hold worship out on beautiful days like today. And we could hold concerts there, or the community could hold concerts there, and there could be plays there, and we could show movies there. Different ways that we could involve the community, invite them to our property and say, we want you to be here because you are us and we are you. We could put in a prayer garden. My dream is still to have a truly handicap accessible playground on the property. A place where children who are in wheelchairs could really go to a playground and be able to play. What difference would that make in our community? That we weren't known as a church with a pond, but where the church is, oh, I saw a play there. Or I have a friend whose child is handicapped and he plays on your property. Or I have somebody who's participating in adult daycare. Or I have a friend who's participating in your preschool. But that's something we have to learn how and talk about how we do those together, because we're standing at a critical moment for this church. When I started, I said I think we had about 5 years to turn the direction of the church around before we started being in trouble. So we're now in year 4. So we stand sort of at a point where we get to make a choice about where we are going. That we can dream big dreams so big we know the only way we can accomplish them is if God helps us. Not that little thing that we can check off the list. That big thing, I don't even know how we would possibly do that. That's so big. We can only do that with God. We can dream those dreams and set down that path, or we can go down the path that says we're going to be here as long as we can be. We'll be here until Pastor John does my funeral, and then we'll close the doors, and we'll go somewhere else. Now, I've closed a church before, and it was the right decision for that church. And I'm proud of the ministry that I did in shepherding them through that path. But I don't think that's the path we should be heading down. I hope that's not the path you think that we should be heading down. Because I think that God has bigger dreams for this church and what we are called to do. Paths that will lead to growth and new life, that will produce the fruits of righteousness in our communities, not the one that leads to decline and to death. We have a huge future in front of us, but we have to be willing to dream big, Holy Spirit-filled dreams. Dreams that we can never succeed in by our own selves, that we need God to accomplish with us. And then to seize them and begin doing the work to see them come to fruition. And let us never forget that this is not about us. This is not your church. It's not my church. It's God's church. We can do what God is calling us to do, or God will find another church to do it for God. That's honestly, I think, the way it works. So which path are we going to choose? The path where we think only about ourselves and concerned about our buildings and what we can do for us? Or that path that leads to big dreams, to transformed lives and transformed communities? If you want me to be here another 20 years, it's those big dreams that we have to seize. I pray that it will be so, my brothers and sisters.